today's topic is one that came to me out of really out of was just a casual thing that just came, and I was looking at some movies and news, and I found that there was this new movie that it's in the works from Buzz Luhrmann that is developing this Joan of Arc movie. And I just have experience with the latest installments and latest movies that they all applied a modern logic to it. And before the movie and the facts would be warped to fit modern narrative, as it's usual the case, to pander to a certain audience, to modern audiences, I just wanted to set the record straight before anything would just come out. And so I find myself here going through the research, going through the history of this incredible character. As we will see, it will be a lengthy lesson at the same time, but I think it will be a worthy one, since there's no way to describe the importance of a character in a few words, because there is a background and nothing seems black or white in history as well, and with particular characters, to know their motivations and to know the actions that brought them to be what they've been, and to the extent of how they shape the course of history and the influence they had on their times. So I just wanted to set the record straight before the movie comes out. And let's get going then. So what about Joan of Arc? She's a revered saint, and she was canonized centuries after her time on May 16, 1920, by Pope Benedict XV. And despite her extraordinary life and tragic death at a young age, she stands out as one of the most and well-documented and celebrated women of the 14th and 15th centuries, meeting her fate just at the age of 19 years old. So how do we know so much about Joan of Arc? So how do we possess such a wealth of information about her? Well, she left behind only a handful of written works, many letters that she dictated with some assistance. Her literary footprint is surprisingly small, and these letters serve as political manifestos, functioning more as public interventions than personal reflections. Yet, with their brevity, it only adds more intrigue to her legacy. The reasons we know more about Joan of Arc than any other woman in her time lies in the unique circumstances of her life, particularly the two trials she endured. The first trial took place during her life and focused on the legal proceedings that sought to condemn her to death. Then, 20 years later, a second trial was initiated by the King of France to investigate the legitimacy of the first trial that ultimately exonerated her. And the second trial was aimed to establish that she neither was a heretic nor a criminal, but a woman guided by divine purpose. These trials provide a rich source of information about Joan. You might wonder about the reliability of such records, because given the bias and the nature of the interrogations, but nonetheless, both trials offer an astonishing amount of detail, revealing her thoughts, motivations, and the extraordinary context in which she lived. In the first trial, which ultimately condemned Joan, lasted nearly 5 months and involved a staggering panel of 131 individuals, including prelates, doctors, theologians, and university professors. And every word Joan spoke during this extensive process was meticulously transcribed. She frequently requested to review the transcripts and often took the initiative to correct any inaccuracies in the records of her statements. This careful documentation led to numerous copies of the trial being produced, resulting in a wealth of material that today provides an in-depth understanding of both the proceedings and the character, Joan herself. Then, 20 years later, the King of France who had ultimately emerged victorious, from whom Joan had bravely fought, ordered a trial to annul the first one. This later trial, more accurately referred to as the trial of nullification, aimed to rectify the injustices of Joan's previous trial. Now, to accomplish this, the authorities gathered testimonies from everyone who had known her. Despite more than 20 years, 2 decades went by, and many who had crossed their paths with Joan were still alive and came forward to share their memories. Now, the accounts collected are truly astonishing. Investigators traveled back to her village, seeking out childhood friends who could provide insight into Joan's early life. So one particular poignant story came from a childhood friend who, at the time of Joan's departure to fulfill her destiny, she was just a girl. Now, a mature woman, she vividly recalled bursting into tears as Joan left without saying goodbye, highlighting the deep bond that they shared. This emotional connection emphasized the profound impact that Joan had for those around her, making her story even more compelling. Then there's a testimony of a noble knight who fought alongside Joan, and this is really interesting, recounting a moment that speaks to both admiration and camaraderie. So he recalls assisting her in putting on her armor, and as he fastened her breastplate, he couldn't help but steal a glance at her youthful figure, remarking on her beauty. This isn't just any knight, it's the Duke of Alençon who shares this memory. And he says, yes, he states, when I helped her with her armor, I caught sight of her breasts, and they were truly beautiful. He even mentions that when she tended to her wounds, her legs were visible, and they were lovely as well. This reveals the unique and personal nature of the records from these trials, showing that Joan's bravery, but also human connections that surrounded her extraordinary life. Now, given this information, we can estimate her birth year, which is impressive considering the lack of record keeping during the Middle Ages. When she stands trial in 1431, Joan asserts that she is around 19 years old. So we refer to her as Joan of Arc or Jeanne d'Arc. But this is a modern label. In her time, no one called her this, not even she herself. So for those who knew her, she was simply Jeanne. Joan was often referred as the maid, and from the French, we can say la pucelle in French, and a little title that emphasizes her purity and mission in the French of their era. Now, la pucelle, or in Italian also la pulcella, carries a serious connotation, referring to the virgin girl, specifically a young girl who hasn't reached marriageable age. So she is known as Jeanne la Pucelle. The Arc comes from her father's surname, Jacques d'Arc, while her mother was Isabelle Romée. This connection to her family roots adds depth to her identity as her origin coming from a small village. Now, during the trial, Joan unexpectedly mentioned something curious. Out of nowhere, she says, "In my village, girls take their mother's name, their mother's surname." This detail emerges almost accidentally, offering a glimpse into her world that surprises everyone. In a deeply patriarchal society, this custom was unusual, even in her village in Lorraine. Yet there was a local tradition. Boys took their father's last name, while girls took their mother's. And by this rule, Joan would have been Jeanne Romée. But when she left her village, the name d'Arc and Romée faded into irrelevance. No one cared about her lineage anymore. She was simply Jeanne, or Joan, the maid, the daughter of a farmer, nothing more or nothing less. We often think of Joan's appeal as an ordinary girl from humble beginnings, but this idea has been exaggerated in popular culture. The image of her as a shepherdess, as a shepherd, It's not true at all. She wasn't even remotely a shepherdess. As for the notion of her being from the lower rungs of society, we need to be more precise. Yes, Joan was the daughter of farmers, but not all farmers were poor. In fact, her family was quite well off. Her father was a respected figure in their village and a prosperous farmer. Joan even had a cousin who was a monk, which speaks to her standing in the community. Having a monk in the family might not seem significant today, but in John's time, a proper monk was referred to as monsieur and held considerable stature in society. John's cousin was one such a monk, and later, while commanding armies alongside the king, she called on him to be her confessor. Her connections didn't end there. She also had a relative who was a parish priest and several brothers who stood by her throughout her journey. So while she may have come from a farming background, Joan's family was far from insignificant. Now, Joan embarked on her incredible journey to meet the king with the goal of saving France from the English during the darkest days of the Hundred Years' War. When she initially left, it wasn't long before her brothers followed her, saying, "We're not leaving the girl alone." They arrived and fought by her side, fully committed to her cause. One of her brothers, Pierre, would ultimately share her fate, being captured alongside Joan in the end. Joan is held captive because the authorities are determined to execute her at all costs. But her brother Pierre is freed after a ransom is paid, a standard practice for knights at the time. Now, wars were not just about territory back then, they were also about profit, and capturing a prisoner meant securing a hefty ransom for his release. Pierre not only regains his freedom, but is knighted by the King of France, using the status of a noble lord. Joan's family, once simple farmers from a remote village, goes on to establish a noble lineage. It's important to avoid the misconception that medieval farmers were isolated and ignorant of the world around them. In reality, even in their village, people were actively engaged in politics. John's father, who often served as the village mayor, understood the power of politics even in the rural setting. And at the height of Joan's success with the king, her father visited her and returned with a remarkable reward, a tax exemption for the entire village. This demonstrates how politics influenced even the most remote areas. The backdrop of Joan's story is the tumultuous Hundred Years' War, particularly its darkest hour for the French. From their perspective, things had never been worse. They had suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Agincourt, and King Henry V of England had entered Paris, where he was crowned King of France. Now, to compound the crisis, part of the French population had aligned themselves with the English, leaving the country bitterly divided. At this point in history, France was a fractured nation. The Burgundians had allied with the English king, leaving the legitimate heir, the Dauphin, struggling to maintain power with support primarily from the southern territories. The Dauphin was the title given to the heir, apparently to the French throne. During Joan of Arc's time, the Dauphin was Charles VII. The north, including Paris, was under English control, and even the prestigious Sorbonne had sided with the English cause. Meanwhile, the rest of France was caught in a struggle between the two factions, and Joan's village, though loyal to the Dauphin, was very close, precariously close, to contested lands with Burgundians, those who had aligned themselves with the English. Just a neighboring village away, the war had splintered loyalties, dividing families, community, and the kingdom itself. At her trial, Joan reflects on how the boys in her community would often clash with those from a neighboring village, as her village supported the Dauphin, Charles, while the others backed the English and Henry. When questioned, she recalls, We were all with the Dauphin, except for one person who sided with the Burgundians and the English. Then she bluntly adds, I would have liked to see their head cut off. Now, realizing the gravity of her statement and that every word was being recorded, she quickly corrects herself, and that is, if it please God, she replies. Throughout the trial, Joan remains accurately aware of her words, skillfully navigating the complex and perilous interrogation process. So it's not that Joan was ignorant or unaware simply because she was the daughter of farmers. Even in rural areas, farmers were well informed about the events shaping the world. They understood that France was being torn apart by civil war, and everyone had to take sides. This awareness of the broader political landscape was part of Joan's upbringing, shaping her understanding of the conflict and her eventual role in it later in the future. In the second trial, many years later, people from Joan's village are called to share their memories of her, and they express a common concern. For heaven's sake, memory changes over time. Who knows if they say what is true or even if they've imagined it. And despite this uncertainty, everyone agrees on one thing. Joan was distinctly different from the other girls. While the other girls may have been preoccupied with their chores, she made a point to attend Mass every month. Whenever there was a funeral Mass in the village, she would set aside her spinning and, like any good girl would, and go to pay her respects. Moreover, she was known to confess as often as possible, highlighting her deep sense of spirituality. During that time, the Church regarded confession as an immensely serious sacrament. Christians were typically instructed to confess just once a year at Easter. This was considered obligatory and reflected the gravity of the act. Confessing more frequently was often frowned upon. Yet Joan of Arc was known to confess regularly, as we analyze the testimonies from those in her village. Something intriguing comes to light. The older villages, those who from her parents' generation, consistently described her as a remarkable child. They often expressed sentiments like, if only she had been our daughter. She was so good, so religious, and we would have cherished having a daughter like her. This admiration illustrates the profound impression she made on her community. Her peers, however, had a different perspective of Joan. They couldn't share much about her character, often saying, sure, she was a bit excessive. Instead of joining us for play, she was always at Mass, and when we went dancing, she never joined us. Some friends affectionately teased her, calling her the little saint. But when the little saint began to hear voices at the age of 12 or 13, their playful jabs took on a different tone. This shift marked a pivotal moment as the whispers of divine guidance began to merge with the everyday lives of the villagers, transforming how they viewed the girl who was once just one of them. Their teasing soon turned into curiosity and unease about her new calling as they grappled with the implications of her new experiences. Now, you may think those medieval women were always hearing voices, but that's not quite the issue here. The key point is that we remember the stories of those who heard voices because they were told and retold. Joan's first encountered her divine voices in a moment that was transformative. She was terrified when it happened. It was around noon one summer day, right in her father's garden. According to her own testimony during her trial, the voice came from the right direction, the direction of the church, accompanied by a bright light. This detail is crucial. Had the voice emerged from the left, skepticism could have easily crept in, raising doubts about this heavenly origin. But coming from the right, that unmistakably sacred direction lent an air of divine authority to her experience, making it clear to her that she was being called to something much greater. Now, there's something that I wanted to share about this term, So in Italian, we have destra to mean the right side, or from your side would be the opposite in this case of the screen, and sinistra. Sinistra is the left side. Now, as you might not know, the left side was somehow always being thought to be the evil side to some extent. And if I want to share with you this term sinistra, doesn't make you think about the term sinister? Sinister, highlighting something that is evil, there is somehow demonic. As being raised by nuns, I was once writing with my left side. However, they took that habit out of me because they thought of it as something sinister or demonic. So there you have why hearing voices from the right side was seen as a positive note compared to the left side that's seen as a demonic one. Just think about these little differences in the religious ideas of Christianity. Now, Joan pondered these extraordinary experiences, feeling a mix of surprise and fear, but gradually convincing herself that these voices were indeed divine. At first, the messages were gentle reminders, encouraging her to be a good girl and attend church regularly. However, as time went on, the voices grew more urgent, revealing a grander mission. She was destined to travel France. But think about it, living on the border of Lorraine, near the Duchy of Burgundy, France felt like a distant land, particularly the territory ruled by the Dauphin. At just 12 or 13, the thought of such a journey seemed daunting. But by the time she reached 15 or 16, the voices became insistent, pushing her to take action. During her trial, Joan later testifies that she heard these voices daily. Eventually, she decides to take a leap of faith. In a nearby village, there was a French garrison led by a captain loyal to the Dauphin. Fueled by determination, Joan ran away from home, seeking out the captain and declaring, "God has sent me to save France." One might think that people in the Middle Ages were more likely to believe such claims. However, the captain's response was surprisingly practical. He reacted much like a modern police officer would if a young girl showed up, insisting on a mission to save the nation and sent by God. Instead of supporting her, he called her family, saying, "Come and pick her up and keep a close eye on her." The captain of the Dauphin, after hearing Joan's bold declaration, took swift action. He contacted her family, saying something like, Take her back home, give her a couple of slaps, and let's put an end to these wild ideas." Joan's family complied, but they quickly realized she wouldn't be her last time she would try to leave. Her determination remained unshaken. This reaction from her families highlights the mindset of the time, shedding light on their fears. Joan's mother later expressed her growing alarm, saying, "Yes, from the first time you ran away, it became clear you were ready to do it again." To her father and brothers, Joan's actions were troubling, as they viewed her ambitions with concern rather than admiration. From their perspective, she wasn't off on a divine mission. To her family, Joan had simply run away to be with soldiers, a dangerous move, especially during a time of war. France had been ravaged by conflict for years, and soldiers passing through villages stirred a mix of fear and excitement. Girls often fled with them, but it rarely ended well. For Joan's family, the thought of their daughter running off with soldiers could only lead to disgrace. It wasn't uncommon for young women in such situations to end up in lives of shame, and Joan's father and brothers were terrified that she would bring dishonor to the family. And her mother, in a moment of deep confession, told Joan, "I overheard your father and brothers talking when they didn't think I was listening. They said, 'She's going to run off with the soldiers and disgrace us all. Our family's honor will be ruined, and it will be better to drown her in the pond.' For a brief chilling moment, they seriously considered, 'Let's drown her and be done with it,' they said. and this drastic action could somehow save their honor. Now, there is a striking parallel in historical records that mirrors what Joan's family considered in a trial from the 1300s. A wealthy family dealt with a daughter who had a sister prone to stealing. Despite repeated attempts to correct her behavior, the sister continued to commit thefts, which by today might seem as indicative of a deeper psychological issue. However, in that time, justice was swift and severe. In the first time that someone was caught stealing, they faced a beating. The second offense led to the loss of an ear, marking them as a criminal. This particular girl had already lost an ear, but persisted in her thefts. This case illustrates the dire measures family might contemplate when faced with behavior that threatened their honor of societal standing. The story from the Aosta archives closely mirrors that of Joan's family. That Joan's family feared. In that case, a girl who kept stealing led her brothers to decide they had to take her away to save their family's honor. They journeyed to the Great San Bernard Pass and worried that if she continued her thieving, people would find out who she was and punish her. In desperation, they chose to drown her in a small lake, believing it was their only way to protect the family name. This tragic choice highlights the extreme actions family would consider to avoid shame. It reflects how deeply honor and reputation weighed on them at the time. Similarly, Joan's family was terrified that her determination to fulfill her mission would lead to their disgrace, showing the lengths people might go to in order to preserve their status. The trial records show that local lords faced a difficult decision regarding the case of the girl who was drowned. After consulting various nobles in the Aosta Valley, they decided to impose a hefty fine on the brothers, but did not punish them further. The lords reasoned that the brothers had acted out of a misguided sense of duty to protect the family honor. Now, there were other times, and they were taking these extreme measures. Luckily, today is not the case any longer. Thankfully, Joan's father and the brothers never took such a drastic action. Instead, Joan remained at home. Now, during her trial, Joan expressed her deep anguish by saying, "There came a moment when I couldn't stand it any longer. It seemed like time would never pass." This statement, recorded in the trial documents, she likened her experience to the seemingly endless wait of a pregnant woman anticipating labor, despite never having been pregnant herself and dying a virgin. The cultural narrative surrounding motherhood and childbirth was prevalent in her upbringing, making the emotions tied to pregnancy relatable to all women of her era, including those like Joan who had not personally experienced it. Joan recounts, "I was there, unable to take it anymore, counting the days like a pregnant woman." Joan recounted expressing her frustration and desperation. Ultimately, she ran away from home again, but this time, fortune favored her. The captain of the Dauphin recognized her determination and responded with unexpected trust. He saw that Joan was more than just an ordinary girl. She was a beacon of hope during a chaotic time. Although the King of England had crowned himself King of France, the rightful monarch still was not coronated. Was referred to as the Dauphin, the heir apparent. Now, in this moment of hope, the captain of the Dauphin, faced with a determined 17-year-old girl, chose to believe in her mission and arranged for her to meet the Dauphin himself. It's important to note that Joan wasn't the first to claim divine voices urging action to save France. If she had been the only one making such claims, the response might have been different. But in a society torn apart by civil war and foreign occupation, these proclamations were not uncommon. During this tumultuous period, it was not unusual for young, impoverished, and often illiterate peasant girls to assert, "God has spoken to me. I am destined to go to the king." to the Dauphin to save France. Many people were open to believing these claims. Just a few years before Joan's journey, the University of Paris had issued a public appeal during a particularly grim time, calling on pious individuals who live virtuous life and possess the gift of prophecy to step forward for the kingdom's salvation. This created an atmosphere of anticipation that something extraordinary might emerge. Just to think about a university that made such statements at the time. Kind of like a cry for help, a cry for hope for the future of France. When John returned to the fortress for the second time, the captain of the Dauphin was already familiar with her. Having spent years at home, yearning to fulfill her destiny, her reputation for having visions and hearing voices had spread throughout the region. This time the captain took a significant risk by deciding to send her to the Dauphin. It was no small decision. He even provided her with a horse and a sword. John made it clear that she wasn't merely delivering a prophecy. Others had done that. Instead, she intended to tell the Dauphin, "God has commanded me to help to lead your armies, to defeat the invaders, and to drive them out of France." Well, she believed these tasks could not be accomplished if she dressed as a woman, so she proclaimed, "I will go dressed as a man." The villagers came together to pool their resources and buy her men's clothing, and Joan chose a bowl cut, haircut, the fashionable hairstyle for men at the time, and transformed their appearance by cutting her hair and donning male attires. So, with a horse provided by the captain, she set off on an 11-day journey to meet the Dauphin in the Loire Valley, accompanied by a military escort for her safety. When John finally arrived at the Dauphin's court, a witness later testified during her trial. She had short hair, wore a wool cap, and was dressed as a man, though in very simple clothes bought for her by the peasants of her village. The Dauphin welcomed Joan, who insisted on speaking to him privately. For the French loyalists, he was the legitimate heir to the throne, almost like a king himself. Once alone, Joan declared that she had been sent by God, but her purpose was not merely to announce a prophecy. She was there to take action. The English were besieging Orléans, a crucial city, and if they captured it, they would gain access beyond the Loire, facilitating an invasion of the southern territories still loyal to France. Despite living 300 kilometers away, Joan was well aware of the siege. Now, 300 kilometers would be approximately 1,600 miles, I would suppose, around that number. Not 1,600, sorry, 160 miles, more or less. She boldly told the Dauphin, "I am not here to announce anything. I was sent to command your army, lift the siege of Orléans, drive the English out, and then take you to Rheims for your coronation as King of France." While her mission differed greatly from modern contests, some element felt familiar. The Dauphin listened but was initially skeptical, thinking, "There's another crazy person. How do I get rid of her?" He worried about the potential for mockery, and if her claims proved false, yet he couldn't entirely dismiss the possibility she was a genuine prophet. To evaluate her claims, he convened a commission of experts, theologians, jurists, loyal advisors, and politicians to interrogate her for a month. Since Joan claimed a vow of virginity, a virginity test was conducted, not just once, but twice, by committees of court ladies to verify her status. During the questioning, theologians posed various inquiries to Joan, including one from a southern accented theologian who asked about the language of the voices she heard. Joan replied in clear French, impressing the commission with her fluency, and ultimately they found her to be sincere, virtuous, humble, and devout. Several intriguing details emerged from their investigation. Joan subsisted on minimal food, often eating just a piece of bread and no more than twice a day. Witnesses noted how astonishingly little she consumed. Additionally, at just 17-year-old, she did not experience her menstrual periods, which piqued the theologians' interest. They drew comparisons to the Virgin Mary, sparking theological debates. Franciscans argued that Mary did not menstruate due to her perfection, while Dominicans contended that she did. Today, we might describe Joan's condition maybe as being affected by amenorrhea, that possibly is the lack of a menstrual cycle, possibly due to the serious nutrient deficiencies like iron and vitamins, which can disrupt hormonal balance and menstrual cycles. But ultimately, the commission concluded that Joan was sincere and she might indeed be on a divine mission. An important aspect of Joan is her illiteracy. She later learns to sign her name, but fundamentally she is uneducated. Despite this, the confidence from her visions gives her a sense of superiority over the male intellectuals who rely on books. When questions about the unusual notion of a girl commanding armies, John boldly asserts that the Lord possesses a book no cleric has ever read. When the commission expresses skepticism, she insists that there are greater things in the Lord's book than in theirs, emphasizing her belief in her divine calling. This conviction prompts an immediate plan of action. A complex political and military strategy is initiated to test whether Joan is indeed the key to salvation. Propaganda efforts intensify, reviving prophecies about a young girl from Lorraine destined to save France. As the story gains traction, pamphlets, treaties, and quick publications emerge, all of them heralding her as the kingdom's savior. So there's an uprising in the morale of France. So we can envision that Joan underwent combat training as she quickly became skilled in fighting. She was bestowed with a coat of arms and with an emblem featuring 2 gold lilies on a blue field, a symbol of France. Taking command of the army, she led the march to Orléans and crafted her first public letter, brimming with confidence. In this letter, she uses the pronoun I 6 times and refers to herself as the maid 7 times. It addresses the King of England, still just a child, and the Duke of Bedford, commanding them to return the keys of the cities and leave France by divine order. Joan's confidence is evident in her letter to the King of England, where she threatens that if he does not comply with her demands, she will unleash war against him and force his men to obey, even to the point of death. Declaring that she is sent by God, she presents herself as his chosen instrument to drive the English out of France. However, the English besieging Orléans dismiss the letter, planning to burn it, mockingly suggesting she should return to her cows. This leads to Joan being put on trial, where a debate arises regarding her claims on never having used a sword or spilled blood. While some witnesses contradict her, affirming that she indeed wielded a sword and led troops into battle, the exact nature of her involvement remains ambiguous. Her role was supported by witnesses during her trial, where soldiers and leaders testified about her presence and influence on the battlefield. These sources indicate that she was indeed involved in combat and played a significant role in motivating and leading the troops. Joan battles are not grand confrontations in open fields, but rather intense, rough battles. She climbs ladders and leads assaults against fortifications, enduring the dangers of crossbow bolts, falling stones, and boiling oil. Over a short period from stepping on a caltrop, an iron spike used to injure enemies, the second from a crossbow, so she was wounded apparently 3 or 4 times, from a crossbow bolt on her shoulder, the third from a stone, and the fourth from another injury believed to be in her thigh. Chroniclers from the time, including the Chronique de la Pucelle, in writings by contemporaries like the Chronicle Jean Chartier, document her participation in key battles, particularly the Siege of Orléans in 1429. Despite these hardships, she fights valiantly and achieves remarkable victories. One by one, she takes bastion after bastion from the English besieging Orléans. Ultimately, the city is liberated, and she enters Orléans alongside the Dauphin amid jubilant celebration. The English, facing defeat, prepare to launch a counter-offensive, but Joan meets them head-on in the Battle of Patay in June 18, leading to a decisive victory that sends the English into full retreat. The stage is now set for Charles VII, the Dauphin, to seize the opportunity he has long awaited, to advance to Reims and the sacred site of French coronation, and finally claim his rightful place as King of France. And on July 16th, Joan marches into Reims, carrying the banner proudly alongside him in the Gothic cathedral, amidst in the grandeur and reverence. So Charles VII is crowned King of France, finally, a significant turning point in a war that has lasted for decades. In just 3 months, May, June, and July, Joan has fundamentally altered the trajectory of the 100 Years' War. While the conflict will continue for years to come, her remarkable achievements have transformed Charles from a beleaguered dauphin into the legitimately and victorious King of France. Despite her monumental role in this transformation, there are relatively few accounts of her personal life during this time. What little we know suggests that Joan maintained a certain distance from the men around her, choosing instead to surround herself with women, including servants and ladies. She shared their quarters, slept among them, yet also managed to engage with the men at arms, even sharing jokes and camaraderie when appropriate. Joan's family, particularly her brothers, came to witness her exploit and to vouch for her character, ensuring that any gossip about her association with soldiers would be suppressed. Well, despite her military responsibilities, Joan remained deeply concerned with maintaining her integrity and reputation. This concern was evident in her strong disapproval of the camp's constant presence of prostitutes. Many accounts recount her fierce determination to protect her soldiers from their influence. She would often chase them away with her sword, and it was a clear indication that her commitment to uphold the moral standards that she believed in. As the festivities unfold, crowds gather to witness the miracle that Joan of Arc has become. Christine de Pizan captured this moment, noting how the people celebrated the honor of our sex. That was a great achievement for women. Eager to touch her, many sought to kiss her hand, while children clamored her to be their godmother. Joan embraced these moments, baptizing their children, lavishing affection on the girls, and of course giving the name Charles to the boys in honor of their newly crowned king. However, the joy and celebration are short-lived. King Charles VII, now crowned, begins to see Joan not anymore as an asset, but as a growing inconvenience. He believes that he has achieved all he could hope for, and feels like the pressures of continuing the war are a little bit overrated. So Joan's insistence on pushing forward becomes a nuisance to the king and to his advisors, leading to a stagnation during the winter of 1429 and 1430. Restless and eager to continue the fight, Joan found her first significant setback during an ill-fated attempt to seize Paris, where she is wounded one more time. As spring arrives, Joan and her allies prepare to resume their effort, but Charles' faith in her capabilities starts waning. He starts to become tired of her. During a battle in Compiègne, she found herself separated from her knights, and she is captured by the Burgundians, who are allied with the English, if you recall. While her fellow knights, including her brother, managed to pay a ransom and return home, Joan's value as a prisoner is far too high, too significant for the Burgundians to let her go. Held captive for May until fall, Joan is imprisoned in a castle under the Duke of Burgundy's jurisdiction, where her treatment appears relatively humane. However, her spirit remains unbroken, and during one daring attempt to escape, she injures her leg. As the situation develops, the English become increasingly insistent on buying her from the Burgundians, and by late 1430, an agreement is reached with the Burgundians for Joan's transfer, setting the stage for her trial. Since they deem it too dangerous to transport Joan to Paris, instead she is taken to Normandy, a region where the English hold considerable strength. As a prisoner, Joan endures a long journey to Rouen, the capital of Normandy. Along the way, crowds gather to see her, particularly women who are drawn to this remarkable figure. This was a sentiment that echoed by the witness at her trial, who described her as a wonder of their sex. And this mirrors what Christine de Pizan earlier said in her earlier words. On January 3rd, 1431, the King of England issues a decree declaring Henry by divine right King of France and England. Notably, he labels Joan, this woman who calls herself Joan the Maid, as a threat, accusing her of abandoning her feminine attire to commit to acts he deems abominable to God. Now, she is portrayed as having violated divine law, dressed in men's clothing, and charged with heinous crimes of murder. The proclamation says that she has misled the people, seducing them into believing she is divinely chosen and endowed with great knowledge from God. The English king's intent is clear. He wants to put Joan of Arc on trial for her alleged crimes. They aim to prosecute her for claiming divine authority and for her masculine presentation, which they see as a challenge to the natural order established by the church. As a result, she is handed over to the church for trial. But it's crucial to note that this is the church loyal to the English crown, so there is some bias there. The ominous conclusion of the decree indicates that, regardless of the trial's outcome, they have no plans to release her. So here begins the extraordinary story of Joan's trial, a pivotal moment that deserves a lot of attention. The English carefully select a bishop from Beauvais to preside over the proceedings, as legal protocol requires that a trial be conducted by either the bishop of the defendant's location for the bishop of the diocese where the alleged crimes occurred. Since Joan was captured in arms disguised as a man within the diocese of Beauvais, it is this bishop's responsibility to judge her. Well, coincidentally, the Bishop of Beauvais is a loyal ally of the English and a prominent political figure associated with the occupying regime. That's the English in this case. His task is clear: to orchestrate a legal trial that would ultimately lead to Joan's condemnation. The world is watching, so they must proceed carefully, finding legitimate grounds to try her. The trial starts with a series of witness interrogations as a thorough collection of evidence regarding Joan's claims of being a prophet sent by God. And after a month of proceedings, the bishop and his team of theologians conclude they have enough evidence to warrant the Inquisition. Joan's claim of divine inspiration, along with other charges, appear sufficient. However, they realize that the evidence against her is weak at best. While the bishop can manage his local church, involving the Inquisition, which has a much stricter approach, is a more serious matter. There's a clear difference between being an inquisitor and dealing with your own church. So he must be a little bit at a loss of words in that case. But the bishop seeks to prosecute her for heresy, arguing that by dressing as a man, she violates church doctrines that mandates women wear feminine attire. This nonconformity adds to the other accusation against her, further branding her as a heretic. To proceed with a heresy trial, the bishop must enlist an inquisitor. So he contacts the Inquisitor of France, known for his pro-English stance, but discovers that the Inquisitor is busy with another important trial and cannot help. The bishop then reaches out to the Vice Inquisitor of France, who oversees matters related to the Diocese of Rome, so to see if he can participate. However, the Vice Inquisitors decline, explaining that his jurisdiction is limited to Rome, and since the alleged crimes occurred in Beauvais, he cannot involve himself without proper authorization. The situation begins to unravel the legal framework needed for a full heresy trial, highlighting the complexity and challenges that the English face in the efforts to silence Joan. Eventually, the bishop secures authorization from the chief inquisitor for his deputy to join the tribunal, enabling the Inquisition to oversee the trial, even if they do so reluctantly. This decision is made with the understanding that all involved recognize the political nature of the proceedings with a bias. The English authorities have already predetermined the outcome, and many are reluctant to participate because they see it as a morally questionable trial. The complexity of the situation becomes clear as the tribunal requires extensive consultation. Over 5 months, 131 professors, as we mentioned earlier, theologians and legal experts are summoned for their advice. Many later expressed discomfort during subsequent nullification trials, indicating they recognize the trial as fundamentally flawed, with no grounds. The atmosphere is tense, with English soldiers stationed outside, fostering a climate of fear that pressures some witnesses to participate against their will. As the trial unfolds, Joan is left without legal representation, a situation by design. Inquisitorial trials focus on obtaining the defendant's acknowledgement of wrongdoing as the primary goal. The ideal outcome is for the accused to confess and say, "You're right, I was wrong, I repent." If the Inquisition secures this confession, the defendant may be spared the ultimate penalty of execution. Thus, the role of a lawyer becomes unnecessary, as the aim is not to defend, but to compel repentance. Despite the lack of legal counsel, the proceedings strive to maintain a facade of legality. Every detail is meticulously recorded, and the tribunal holds public hearings during which Joan is interrogated. However, a significant procedural error occurs. At the start of an inquisitorial trial, the accused must be informed of the specific charges against them. In Joan's case, this notification is delayed. The inquisitors choose to interrogate her first, hoping to catch her in a statement that could then be used to formulate charges. This approach is clearly unlawful, yet they proceed regardless, demonstrating the lengths to which the tribunal will go to secure conviction. In the trial atmosphere is heavy with manipulation and intimidation, casting a long shadow over the proceedings and setting the stage for the ensuing drama as Joan fights for her life against a system rigged against her. When Joan first appears before the judges in the chapel of the Château de Rouen, the atmosphere is charged with tension and legal irregularities. The judges demand that she swears on the gospel to tell the truth, which is already illegal since she has not yet been informed of the charges against her. Displaying an unexpected awareness of canon law, Joan counters their request with a compelling argument. And she says, "But I do not know what you will ask me. How can I swear that I will tell the truth? You may ask me things that I do not want to tell you. You may ask me things that God revealed to me in visions and has forbidden me to disclose. and I cannot perjure God to swear to you. Her refusal is striking, yet she asserts her right to withhold information about divine revelations. After considerable debate, the judges relent, accepting a modified oath wherein she promises to answer truthfully regarding matters of faith, but reserves her the right to lie about other topics. Very particular situation, as you can see. When they also ask her to swear not to attempt an escape, she simply declines. This refusal leads to her confinement, as she is kept chained in her cell with 5 guards watching her at all times. Throughout the trial, she steadfastly refuses to abandon her masculine attire, despite the judge's attempt to coerce her into dressing as a woman. This defiance symbolizes the unwavering identity of her mission, her stubbornness, and of course, her steadfast choice of her identity at the same time. The judges attempt to manipulate her religious practices by promising her the right to attend Mass if she agrees to wear a woman's dress. Joan responds firmly, expressing her desire to attend Mass, but making it clear that she will not commit to wearing women's clothing permanently. This leads to a contentious exchange. She says, "Make me a woman's dress, and I promise that if you send me to Mass, I will wear it for the occasion." When they agree and send a tailor to her cell to take her measurements, the encounter does not go as planned. The tailor's inappropriate touching during the fitting prompts an immediate reaction from Joan. She slaps him, effectively ending any further discussion about the dress. This incident highlights her fierce independence and determination to maintain control over her identity, even in the oppressive circumstances of the trial. As the trial progresses, it becomes clear that Joan's interaction with her judges are marked by a sharp wit and keen awareness of the legal proceedings against her. She refuses to be a passive participant, and using her knowledge of canon law and her convictions to navigate the treacherous waters of the trial. This blend of defiance, intelligence, and strong personal conviction continues to astonish those that analyze the case, as she fights against the system determined to condemn her. Witnesses frequently note how she stood her ground against a group of seasoned theologians, many of whom struggled to understand how a young peasant girl could effectively counter their sophisticated inquiries. For instance, when the judges posed the challenging question, "Are you in a state of grace?" they aimed to trap her. If she claimed she was, it could be seen as arrogance, since no one can truly know their standing with God. However, Joan skillfully sidestepped the trap, responding, "It is difficult to answer such a question. I will say this: if I am in a state of grace, I hope God keeps me there. If I am not, I hope God places me there." This response left the theologians astonished. They were accustomed to debating complex theological concepts, yet Joan's simple answer revealed them her understanding of humility and reliance on divine grace. Now, throughout the proceedings, Joan's keen observations often caught the judges off guard. When the minutes of her trial were read to her, she frequently pointed out discrepancies, asserting, "But I didn't say that." On at least one occasion, her insistence led the judges to amend the records to reflect her actual statements. This not only showed her awareness of the proceedings, but also her determination to prevent her words from being distorted. Despite her remarkable self-advocacy, the atmosphere of the trial was charged with a predetermined outcome. The English had made it clear that if the judges were expected to condemn Joan, adding immense pressure on the court. Yet, the charges against her included accusation of witchcraft, false prophecy, and heresy. She was portrayed as a provocateur of war, a bloodthirsty figure who had forsaken her femininity by dressing and arming herself as a man, actions deemed contrary to divine and natural law. At this point, the true nature of the inquisitorial trial emerged, and the judges sought a confession from Joan, pressing her to recount her claims and admit that her visions were false. This was not just a legal formality, it was crucial for their own safety and careers. The English overlords had made it clear that failing to convict her would have serious consequences for the judges. As the pressure mounted, the judges considered resorting to torture to force Joan to sign a confession. This marked a critical turning point in the trial. They prepared to take her to the torture chamber to display the instruments of pain, intending to intimidate her. Following the procedure, they were required to show her the tools of torture before leaving her alone for the night to reflect on her decision. However, Joan's spirit remained unbroken. She firmly refused to sign the confession, prompting a meeting of a restricted commission made up of 15 judges, theologians, and professors from the Sorbonne. This commission debated whether it would be appropriate to torture her. A significant majority, 12 out of 15, opposed the idea of torture, citing moral concerns and potential consequences. Only 3 judges argued in favor of torture, highlighting the complexity of Joan's trial and the politically charged environment, where even the judges acknowledged the extraordinary nature of the young woman before them. As the trial progressed, it became increasingly evident that the struggle was not just for Joan's life, but for larger questions of faith, authority, and the role of women in a society that found her very existence threatening. Joan's unwavering determination and sharp intellect made her a formidable opponent in a trial that was intended to lead her for condemnation. The trial and execution of Joan of Arc unfold in a dramatic and tragic manner, marked by political machinations, religious fervor, and a fierce struggle for power. Her enemies, particularly the English, sought to manipulate the judicial process to condemn her, creating a situation full of complexities and contradictions. Initially, the English claimed to force Joan to sign a confession, believing this would solidify their control and undermine her influence. The debate among the judges about whether to torture her highlights their divided motivation. Some sought to compel a confession to present her as a false prophet, while others, perhaps eager to see her executed, preferred to expedite the trial without resorting to torture. Despite the pressure, Joan held her ground, refusing to sign any document that would deny her faith and visions. However, the situation escalated dramatically when she was brought to the square where a pyre awaited her, facing a sermon denouncing her as a heretic, and with English soldiers closely monitoring the proceedings, she felt the weight of the crowd's expectations and the imminent threat to her life. In a moment of desperation, she seems ready to concede, and she says, "Fine, I'll sign the confession. I don't care." As she reached for the pen, a murmur of dissent arose among the English soldiers, who felt misled by the proceedings. The authorities, realizing that the situation was slipping from their control, left in outrage, leaving Joan to sign the document under duress. One of her attending doctors reported that she signed it with the belief that it would lead to her freedom, underscoring the manipulative environment in which she was trapped. With their signature, the judges were compelled to spare her life, but deemed her crimes severe enough to warrant lifelong imprisonment. On May 24th, 1431, she wore women's clothing as dictated by the court, but the prison environment proved hostile. Reports suggested that threats from the jailers may have influenced her decisions to revert to men's clothing just 2 days later, highlighting her defiance against the court's orders and her determination to maintain her identity. The The English authorities, alarmed by the development, interpreted her actions as a resurgence of her defiance. In a swift turn of events, the court reconvened, and now claiming she had relapsed into her heretical behavior, condemned her to death. On May 30th, 1431, she was led to the pyre, where she received confession and communion, and an unusual concession giving her supposed status as a heretic. Well, this moment highlights the internal conflict and moral dilemmas faced by her judges, many of whom felt they were committing a grave injustice. As the flames engulfed her, the reaction of those present was profound. Many judges reportedly felt sick at the realization of the magnitude of their mistake, recognizing Joan not only as a brave figure, but also as a symbol of hope and resilience for the French people. The crowd's emotional response highlighted her status as a martyr, and her tragic end resonated deeply with all who witnessed it. After the execution, the executioner confessed to his confessor that he felt he had damned himself by carrying out the sentence. This admission reflects the moral weight of Joan's death and the troubling legacy of her trial, a politically motivated condemnation aimed at silencing a powerful voice for change and defiance against oppression. Joan's story became a potent symbol of faith, resistance, and ultimately martyrdom, leading to her eventual canonization by the Catholic Church and solidifying her place in history as a figure of immense significance. Her trial and execution revealed that the complexity of power, faith, and identity during a tumultuous period, showing how a single individual could challenge the established order and inspire generations to come. Well, this is the end of our story here, and to my surprise, while I was doing the research and recording this, I was thinking of how in history, and I don't know if it's a deeply recurrent theme of having the Savior, of the Savior becoming a martyr to an extent, to protect his ideas, to not falter in front of death, and to facing death and still be strong in the pursuit of their ideas, because their ideas are much, much stronger and dear to them, because in the face of injustice, there is no other act of defiance than risking their own life in order to defend and leave a testament of their will on those who remain living. And I found this theme particularly of religious importance because as we see Jesus dying as the Son of God, or other figures in history, there is this recurrent theme of martyrdom to an extent, like showing to the world, leaving this testimony of your will on the world, and leaving with this impact of death in order to prove a point. Maybe to a modern audience today might not be worth that much, but maybe I'm not saying that we need to resort to extremes to prove a point, but just simply to fight for an idea, for something that is ethical, that is just. And I think that's what the ultimate price Joan of Arc paid in her time. But so many questions arise, and it's easy to criticize history from this point of view, because where was the dolphin? How is it possible that such thing happened? How is it possible they did not try to negotiate, to take it away? We will never understand this. We will never know. But it's also true that if on one side we have Joan's ideas and her, she being spoken from God and asserting her identity and her transformation, as wanting to wear men's clothes. But it wasn't just about that. It was her purity, it was her virginity, it was like the elevation of this simple woman, single young woman, elevated to the status of savior of a nation, and being the spirit that gave the motivation to uprise and conquer and reclaim France and allow a transformation, of this nation to being reborn, a 100-year conflict, So what you want is you want to animate the troops, animate the soldiers. But then on the other side, you have the English. Like, if we lose this against this young woman, what kind of figure, what kind of all these grand men, especially living in a highly patriarchal society, So it would be a huge blow to the church, to these men, and to their ego, to say, like, we have been defeated by this little girl here, that she was the symbol of the French. We're the English. We're at war. If we let her win, if she still lives, she will make a mockery of us. So you just think about the repercussions and what kind of message they would send to the realm. That would mean defeat, not just personally, but also as a nation. The English would just be defeated. So as we stand here, we can make various assumptions of how history could have gone, but we can't. We can just recount the facts with honesty and truthfulness, and we can spin it however way we want. But the history, that's the history, and we cannot go as far as rewriting, because we will be denying the truth. So that's what matters in the end, the truth. And let's finish this episode by thinking about to what extent someone is willing to defend their ideas, because in their hearts they're fighting for something that is real, that is true. And maybe we need something more of that today. We don't need martyrdom, of course, but we need to fight for our ideas, to fight for the divine truth that is out there, and to inspire people to do the same, and to go beyond any side, and just let everybody see what the truth is, because the truth is objective. So I think that's a testament to Joan of Arc. Well, aside from this rant, I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time.